Today from the global lane, still no peace deal. Putin digs in his heels over land and security. What will it take to secure the return of thousands of missing Ukrainian children?
The answer, the ultimate answer, Gary, remains in the power of prayer and the action that Christians in America can take in praying for the safety of the children.
Prayer helps National Guardsman Andrew Wolfe cling to life.
It was an ambush, and so it was very close quarters, just critical injuries, and I'm so glad to hear that he's alive and responding.
Once an ally of the military and CIA, why the suspected shooter turned against the United States.
You can take the Afghan out of Afghanistan, but can you take Afghanistan out of the Afghan?
Silencing speech. A Mississippi street preacher challenges a law restricting protests at a concert venue.
I love to go out and tell folks about Jesus.
And it's all right here on the global lane. President Trump has expressed optimism that a peace deal to end the war in Ukraine is getting closer. He sent Secretary of State Rubio, followed by his son-in-law Jared Kushner and negotiator Steve Witkoff to Moscow this week to meet with Vladimir Putin. While the proposed deal includes the concept of land for peace, there is still the pressing issue of more than 20,000 Ukrainian children who have been abducted by Russian forces. First Lady Melania Trump is leading efforts to make the return of these children a top priority in the peace negotiations. Senior White House correspondent Kelly Wright has the story.
The people of Ukraine continue to face constant danger from almost daily Russian drone attacks. Adding to the death and destruction, Russian forces have taken thousands of Ukrainian children into captivity.
It's horrible. Ukraine lost 50% of children's population.
Mykola Kuleba, founder of Save Ukraine, tells CBN News his organization is committed to rescuing these children, many who have been subjected to human trafficking.
They told us that they will not let us go back because Russians now went out of the city, and now there is Ukrainian Nazis there back again.
3 years ago, Danica Yatsenyu and friends at a youth recreation camp were taken captive by invading Russian forces. Danica, now 16, tells CBN News the Russians told them it would not be safe to return home.
They don't want to return us back because they're Nazis, they will kill us and they will eat us there, and that's why it's dangerous. But I believed in that propaganda because everybody kept saying, both children and adults, that it's dangerous to come back to Ukraine.
The most cruel statement came when they told Danica his mother didn't love him. Back home, Alla, Danica's mother, desperately searched for her missing son. She then reached out to Save Ukraine.
In these 6 months, I've been doing impossible. I've been doing everything to just rescue him.
After 6 months, mother and son were reunited. While their ordeal ended, thousands of children remain separated from their families. Their plight came to the attention of First Lady Melania Trump, who wrote President Vladimir Putin, seeking his help in returning all of the children. Putin responded by providing a team to work with her representative to ensure the children's safe return.
She can help to verify that kids and bring them home. We believe this, and we really need her in this war as a lady of such a great country, First Lady. And she can do this.
Kelly joins us now with more from Washington. Kelly, First Lady Trump wrote a letter to Russian President Vladimir Putin expressing her concern about those missing children. Now Putin's aware that the issue is on the Trump administration's radar. While a letter may be significant, making it a priority in peace talks is something entirely different. So how important is this matter for the American negotiators? Because we haven't heard much about it during the negotiations.
You know, we have not heard much about it, Gary, and that could be because what the First Lady opted to do was to do this through backdoor diplomacy, if you will. She went through back channels, getting directly to Vladimir Putin. He, in turn, responded by giving her a team from his own group to work with her representative in trying to secure the release of all of the children who are being held in Russian captivity. To date, there have only been 8 released. Nevertheless, that is still significant for getting something done. Save Ukraine has been doing a lot of work, and they applaud what the First Lady has been doing. But as stated in my story, they would like to see her do more and not stop, because they believe you have to put pressure on Vladimir Putin diplomatically as well as strategically to ensure that the children who have been captured by Russian forces will be released back to their families in Ukraine, which is of the utmost importance.
Kelly, I'm sure the First Lady is influencing the president on this issue, and she's very passionate about it. How did she first get involved?
Well, she got involved. You have to remember, she's from that area. She's from Slovenia. She knows how Putin operates. She knows how the communists operate there, the socialists. And she is very aware of what goes on in that part of the world. Many times you've heard the President of the United States state publicly that he would be try to do a deal with Vladimir Putin in getting peace brokered and secure between Ukraine and Russia. And he would go to the First Lady and say, hey, I just had a great meeting with Vladimir Putin. And she retorted saying, well, you did? Well, he's bombing other cities now. So she has always been front and center in keeping the president abreast of the fact that Putin is someone you really can't trust. Be that as it may, the president has put out those olive branches to try to secure a decent relationship with Vladimir Putin. This is a man that the president of the United States says that he knows, that he's been a friend with in the past. But the bottom line, Gary, is that Vladimir Putin remains his own worst enemy in trying to secure any peace, and it remains Ukraine's worst enemy in debilitating Ukrainians, destroying their energy, destroying their lives, and taking their children as well.
And how difficult will it be to locate all of these children? I'm sure Putin and his subordinates do not know the location of all the children, or do they?
I would venture to say they do not know the location of all of the children. This is a war, and in war, lives are lost. And as Mykola Kuleba, who is the head of Save Ukraine, informed me, there are millions of people who have lost their lives in Ukraine since this war began. Many of them are children. Children are the most vulnerable in any war. And certainly this is heartbreaking. So it remains to be seen how many children are actually lost. And the official government total is 20,000. There's more than that. There are thousands more than that. The answer, the ultimate answer, Gary, remains in the power of prayer and the action that Christians in America can take in praying for the safety of the children and getting those children secure and released from human trafficking and from all kinds of other indoctrination and propaganda that they've been exposed to.
And for the peace of Ukraine. Okay, from Washington, CBN News White House correspondent Kelly Wright. Thank you, Kelly. Excellent report. Keep up the good work. God bless.
Thank you.
Americans grieve the loss of a National Guardsman and pray for another who is fighting for his life in the ICU at Washington Hospital. Here with the latest is Air Force Colonel Josh McConkey. He's West Virginia Emergency Preparedness Liaison Officer for the National Capital Region Joint Task Force. He's also a combat physician, Iraqi freedom veteran, author of the book, Be the Weight Behind the Spear. Dr. Colonel Joshua, the father of Guardsman Andrew Wolfe, has asked for prayer for his son who is fighting for his life after emergency surgery. A nurse reportedly said he gave a thumbs up and wiggled his toes, so that's encouraging. What can you tell us about his injuries and the struggle he's facing?
Well, that is wonderful news, and that is news to me. So I had not yet heard that. So if he is awake and conscious, responding to people, giving a thumbs up, that is a fantastic sign. I've been an emergency physician over 20 years, and I know the injuries were quite severe. He was in the ICU and was critically ill, and I'm very glad to hear that.
Well, what can you tell us about his injuries? A recent prayer vigil was held in West Virginia for Wolfe and National Guard member Specialist Sarah Beckstrom. She's the 20-year-old who was killed in the Thanksgiving Eve attack, and our hearts and prayers go out to her family, her friends. Did the alleged assailant, Afghan Ramanullah Lakhanwal, shoot Sarah and Andrew in the head? Because they were wearing body armor, weren't they? Kevlar vests? Were they wearing helmets? What more can you tell us about that and the injuries that Wolfe sustained?
It was an ambush. And so it was very close quarters. Literally, there's nothing they really could have done to prevent the shooting. If just a random individual just walks up with you and pulls a .357. So Sarah did have injuries to the head. I can't comment on the injuries to Sergeant Wolfe right now, other than they did have some protective gear, but it obviously had missed those areas. Just critical injuries, and I'm so glad to hear that he's alive and responding.
Yes, we're all thankful. He needs more prayer. And what more can be done to protect the National Guardsmen in Washington, D.C., and of course elsewhere, from more attacks like this one?
You know, there's always risks when you wear your uniform out in public, unfortunately. As a military commander myself, I always cautioned my individuals to not wear their uniforms outside of the military base at Andrews Air Force Base. A lot of them would change before leaving and driving home for the day for these specific reasons. And then, unfortunately, you've had some rhetoric that's been dialed up by our own members of Congress, strangely enough, some House members and some Senate members that have put out a video and have talked about disobeying orders from the President of the United States. I don't think those things do anyone any good, and it certainly places our men and women at risk. So we need to tone down that rhetoric and just let them do their job. They're making the nation's capital a safer place.
How does that affect the members of the Guard and also the military when they hear rhetoric like that?
You know, the military is apolitical. We follow orders. We follow orders whether it was President Biden's administration or President Trump's administration. So, you know, we try not to get caught up in those politics. Unfortunately, there just are some members in Congress right now that are saying some strange things and putting out there. I've never seen that in 23 years of military service, and to my knowledge, it had never been done before.
Yeah, telling members of the military to disobey orders that they deem illegal. And I was wondering, okay, who would deem they're illegal anyway, and what orders are we talking about? I mean, if you were serving, say, in Iraq or Afghanistan or even on the streets of D.C. and you heard something like that, what would be your thought?
Well, I tell you what, if you take an example, let's talk about some political turmoil in the 60s. If you had men and women serving in Vietnam, and you had members of Congress putting out videos of disobeying orders from the President of the United States, like during combat operations, how completely inappropriate and dangerous that would be. You know, right now there's a war on violence, there's a war on drugs. You know, these are very lawful orders for the president to call up members of the National Guard and secure the nation's capital. There was no debate on that. So I don't know what orders they were referring to, but just doing the political games is not helpful.
Joshua, some Americans blame President Trump for this attack instead of the alleged assassin, saying that the president deployed these troops unnecessarily, and if he hadn't done it, this wouldn't have happened. So what do you, and I'm sure the National Guardsmen that you talk to, say about Guard deployment in American cities like D.C., L.A., Memphis, elsewhere?
Well, I know these members are very proud to be there. These are volunteers. Both Andrew and Sarah had volunteered to take the place of two West Virginia individuals that had some young children so they could be home with their family for Thanksgiving. You know, men and women have been making sacrifices for this country for well over 250 years, and they take great pride in doing that, being a part of something bigger than themselves and wearing that uniform. For me, professionally, my service, I spent 9 years in the Army National Guard. That's the thing. Those are some of the things I'm most proud of professionally.
And what do you think needs to happen next?
Well, right now, just stay the course. Let these men and women do their jobs. They're making Washington, D.C. a much safer place. That's the face of our nation. They've had a large decrease in violent crimes, in all crime in general. I mean, the results speak for themselves. It's clearly working. And, the president is within his right to order that.
Okay, Dr. Colonel Josh McConkey, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
The radicalization of the National Guard shooting suspect. 29-year-old Afghan immigrant Ramanullah Lakhanwal reportedly spent weeks alone, isolated in a dark room, during which he experienced depression and manic episodes. How did a loving husband and father, who was once an ally to the United States and the CIA, turn against the country and the people who welcomed him? Here to provide some answers is America's terrorist therapist, psychiatrist, podcast host, Dr. Carol Lieberman. She's author of the book, Lions and Tigers and Terrorists, Oh My! How to Protect Your Children in a Time of Terror. Dr. Carol, it's good to talk with you again. So in your professional opinion, how did this happen? How did this CIA helper become an alleged assassin?
Okay. Well, there are different parts to the story. It starts with his having been welcomed to the United States under the Biden regime during the turmoil in Afghanistan as Biden was surrendering. And of course, there were 70 to 80,000 Afghans brought over to America at that time. Now, you can well imagine, with all the turmoil in Afghanistan, these Afghans were not vetted. There was no way that they could be properly vetted. So, one question is, you can take the Afghan out of Afghanistan, but can you take Afghanistan out of the Afghan? So we don't know for sure that how the radicalization took place, or how he was radicalized, if he was radicalized online, in addition to, once he came to America. But that is going on all the time. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all the different terrorist organizations do public relations, do these recruitments are going on all the time. And there are people going to the Middle East all the time to join these radical organizations. Some of them don't go to the Middle East, they stay here, but they're radicalized. Then there's another aspect to it, which is that some of his friends and neighbors have supposedly contacted, when they saw that his mental health was deteriorating, they allegedly contacted some refugee organizations to try to get help for him. And apparently he didn't get help, and it's very, very vague and fuzzy as far as what happened there. Let's just say that he does have some kind of psychiatric disorder, mental illness. That does not excuse him from, or does not mean that he can't blame it all on that. You can have mental illness and be a terrorist at the same time. And then there's a new theory coming out that perhaps the Taliban had threatened him, that if he didn't carry out some kind of attack, that they would do something, kill or injure his family.
Well, there's also this issue of online radicalization. He was locked in his room for a couple of weeks, allegedly or reportedly. What effect would that have?
Regardless of how much or how little radical Islamist beliefs he brought with him from Afghanistan, certainly, subjecting yourself or reminding himself of all of these things online through the radicalization, through being back in contact either with the Taliban or ISIS or Al-Qaeda, any of these terrorist organizations, could well, especially if he was having a mental illness at the time, an episode at the time, that would remind him, that would encourage him, that would remind him to get back to his roots, things like that. So yes, and even people who weren't born in Afghanistan.
Well, I want to talk about that, because how about young people? I know that spending hours on social media can be detrimental to mental health, especially young people. And we've seen a broader trend of mass shootings, 2 assassination attempts on Donald Trump, assassination of Charlie Kirk, now the Army specialist Sarah Beckstrom in D.C. It seems there's a common thread of online radicalization. So how concerned should we be, parents, grandparents? What are the warning signs?
Parents absolutely need to be much more aware of what their kids or even their young adults are watching, what websites they're going to, what dark web portals they're going to. Much more concerned about that than most parents are. And, the whole idea of kids being able to bring cell phones into class is just absurd. And so kids, especially after COVID, with the 2 years that they weren't in school, and that really has had a profound psychological impact. And so, for everybody, actually, when you have PTSD, one of the symptoms is that you feel that your life is going to be shorter than what you had expected. And so teenagers and even 20-year-olds have this sense of that their life isn't going to be as long as they had thought, and they want to go out with a bang. So they're more tempted to do these really kinds of outrageous things, to get famous, to leave a legacy, to be known as something before they die.
Okay, the book is Lions and Tigers and Terrorists. Oh my, how to protect your child in a time of terror. Dr. Carol Lieberman, thank you for sharing your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Free speech and freedom of religion before the U.S. Supreme Court. Evangelist Gabriel Olivier was fined and given a suspended 10-day jail sentence for violating a city ordinance that prohibits protests outside the Brandon, Mississippi amphitheater. Protesters are restricted to designated zones around the facility. However, Gabriel was handing out tracts on a walkway leading to the concert venue. The issue is that he wasn't protesting anything. He was sharing the gospel.
I love to go out and tell folks about Jesus. They hand out gospel tracts to people and tell them about the message of Christ as they're walking to the concert.
Some people complained that Gabriel was too loud and shouted insults. However, he wasn't charged with obstructing access or disturbing the peace. Isn't it interesting? People complained that he was too loud, but they didn't raise any complaints about the volume of the concert, which was likely many decibels louder. As for the shouting of insults, Paul the Apostle stated that some may perceive the gospel message as insulting or offensive. In 1 Corinthians 1:23, he wrote, "Preaching Christ crucified is a stumbling block for Jews, foolishness to the Gentiles." Gabriel is suing the city, not over his conviction, but because he believes the ordinance violates free speech and the right to religious expression. The Supreme Court will consider a procedural issue in this case. Can Gabriel sue without having served time in jail? It's clear that the city of Brandon originally passed this ordinance to restrict protests and demonstrations and is now using it to prevent religious speech that it does not want to tolerate. This is clearly unconstitutional. The Supreme Court needs to overturn the lower court rulings, deeming them, not Gabriel's actions and message, as foolish. Well, that's it today from the Global Lane. Until next time, be blessed.